Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into the misty folds of time, to a place where stone walls press in around you and the candlelight flickers with every heartbeat. You find yourself at the foot of an ancient monastery, where ivy scales the walls like it's racing you to the heavens, and the scent, yes, that thick, honeyed, calming scent, of lavender floats heavy in the cool air. You'd think you're safe here, but honestly, you probably wouldn't survive medieval life 5 minutes, bad hygiene, no antibiotics, and more weird diseases than you can pronounce. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's always fun seeing who's wide awake halfway across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge up the worn stone steps of the monastery, each creak of the wood underfoot a whisper from centuries past. The walls seem to lean closer, conspiratorial, as though eager to let you in on an ancient secret. And there, right there lining the cobbled pathways, rows and rows of lavender, heavy with bloom, their purple spikes bobbing gently in the night breeze like they're nodding at you. It's easy to think lavender is just for decoration. Pretty, sure, but you're not here for a garden tour. As you lean down to brush your fingertips against the soft blossoms, a rich, almost syrupy fragrance fills your nose, thicker and deeper than any lavender you've sniffed at a modern-day spa. If flowers had an aftertaste, this one would be honey mixed with earth and a pinch of something spicy. You pull back, suddenly aware, this isn't accidental. It's deliberate, planned with a monk's precision and a strategist's mind. Lavender doesn't just make the place smell nice, it guards it. See, these monks weren't just praying and copying texts, they were fighting a constant, invisible war. Their libraries weren't stacks of mass-produced paperbacks, they were handwritten manuscripts, laboriously inked onto vellum made from animal skins. Each book could take years to complete, and they were terrifyingly fragile. Moisture, mold, mice, moths, if it could crawl, chew, or rot, it wanted those books. Historians still argue whether lavender was a common choice or an elite luxury. But what's certain is that here, in these secretive corridors, it was a frontline defense. Lavender has natural properties that repel insects and even some molds. A monk with a sheaf of new parchment wasn't just worrying about the text, he was worrying about how to keep it safe for the next century, or 10. You trail your fingers along a thick oak door, its iron hinges groaning in protest as you ease it open. Inside, the library stretches out like a cathedral to knowledge. Low ceilings, narrow windows, rows of desks. Candles flicker, their wax pooling like lazy rivers down thick stands. In the hush, you hear the scratch of a quill and the almost imperceptible rustle of parchment. And hanging in the air, blending with the sharp tang of ink and old leather, is that omnipresent thread of lavender. Fun fact? Some monks used to stuff sachets of lavender into the spines of books or tuck them in between the pages. No modern deodorizer needed, just good old-fashioned botany. Of course, back then, they couldn't exactly run a randomized double-blind study on pest repellents, but empirical evidence, i.e., fewer wormholes and less mildew, told them they were onto something. You wander farther, your hands skimming the spines of books whose covers are cracked but still proud. Here, knowledge wasn't just something to collect, it was something to survive. You had to think like a medieval monk. Why spend decades illuminating a single manuscript only to watch it be eaten by bugs or rot from damp air? But let's not get too romantic. Medieval monasteries were cold, damp, and notoriously underfunded. A surprising number of monks suffered from respiratory problems, eye strain, and mysterious chronic illnesses that, if you lived today, would send you running for a chest x-ray and a week's worth of antibiotics. The lavender wasn't just for the books, it was for the monks too. You pause, inhaling deeply. Some of the scent is old, baked into the stone, but some is fresh, sprigs tucked into little clay vases on narrow sills, or dried bundles dangling from the rafters like sleepy bats. A fringe theory among medieval scholars suggests that monks didn't just grow lavender to repel pests. Some whisper they used it in rituals designed to protect not just their libraries but their very souls. Lavender was thought to ward off evil spirits, its fragrance a kind of olfactory shield. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread or confined to a few more esoteric orders, but evidence remains tantalizingly incomplete. You move deeper into the stacks, the light fading with every step. Here, in the thick of the quiet, you can almost hear the centuries breathing around you. The lavender, still standing sentinel after all this time, is part of that breath, a testament to the strange, fragrant war monks waged in the dark, not with swords, but with petals. And you? You're just a visitor. But for tonight, at least, you're part of the hush, part of the legacy. You shuffle a little deeper into the monastery's gardens, careful where you step. The pathway narrows, hemmed in by unruly waves of lavender, the kind that wouldn't make it onto a Pinterest board but clearly thrives here, sprawling and thriving like it owns the place. You pluck a small sprig and rub it between your fingers. The oils burst forth, sharp and heady, staining your fingertips with a sweet yet peppery scent that lingers long after you let the blossom fall. Lavender wasn't just a pretty face in the medieval world. Far from it. Sure, the delicate purple flowers added a bit of color to otherwise dreary graystone courtyards, but monks weren't planting them for their aesthetic value. Lavender had serious street cred. Known as lavandula, from the Latin lavare, meaning to wash, it was revered for its cleaning properties. Monks used it to wash linens, scrub down surfaces, and freshen the air in places where hygiene was, well, let's say a work in progress. You tiptoe past a bench where a plump old monk snoozes, a half-finished basket of lavender stalks by his side. The scent is practically thick enough to see, swirling in lazy clouds around him. If he's dreaming, you hope it's of something nice, certainly not fleas or lice, two of the most persistent medieval companions. Here's the kicker, lavender wasn't native to Britain or Northern Europe. It hailed from the rocky hillsides of the Mediterranean and was gradually ferried north by Roman invaders, traders, and later, crusaders returning from the Holy Land, sunburnt and laden with both relics and practical souvenirs. Historians still argue whether monks started cultivating lavender independently or learned it from earlier Roman gardens, but either way, they embraced it wholeheartedly. Practicality ruled monastic life, and lavender fit the bill perfectly. It served as a disinfectant long before germs were even a twinkle in a scientist's microscope. Infused into vinegar or boiled into rudimentary tonics, lavender was believed to cleanse wounds and ward off infection. Monks were among the few literate members of society and often the de facto doctors in their communities. Their herb gardens, known as physic gardens, weren't quaint, they were survival. You turn a corner and stumble upon one such physic garden, a neat but wild patchwork of herbs and medicinal plants. Lavender claims pride of place here, its squat bushes fending off encroaching weeds like veteran soldiers. It's easy to imagine a novice monk, scratchy robe tied tight, bending over these beds at dawn, clipping lavender stems and muttering prayers under his breath, the mist curling around him like something half alive. Beyond its antiseptic powers, lavender was also a social tool. It masked the less than pleasant odors that no amount of medieval bathing habits could conquer. Personal hygiene was, let's be charitable and say limited. People bathed maybe once or twice a year if they were feeling fancy, and a whiff of lavender tucked into a robe or pressed into a book was a lifesaver, or at least a nose-saver. Of course, lavender's power wasn't absolute. Monasteries still suffered plagues and pestilence, and no amount of floral fragrance could stand up to, say, the Black Death. But for day-to-day survival, it was a little shield, a fragrant barrier between the monks and the microbial world they didn't even know existed. Some orders even crafted lavender-infused candles, which burned during prayer hours. These weren't your Instagrammable soy wax variety but hefty hunks of tallow or beeswax, dripping and guttering, spreading that soothing scent through the dark, cold cloisters. Imagine hunching over a dense manuscript, your eyes blurring in the gloom, and catching a soft whiff of lavender smoke. A small mercy. There's even a fringe theory that monks believed lavender carried a kind of divine approval. It's said, though only in the murkiest footnotes of history, that lavender was planted in the shape of sacred symbols, perhaps crosses or labyrinths, to infuse the air with both physical and spiritual purity. Historians still argue whether this was practical garden design or a ritualistic attempt to weave prayer into every breath. You wander through the rows, feeling a kind of respect, not the grand, thundering respect you might reserve for cathedrals or kings, but a quieter kind. The kind you give to the small, persistent battles. Because lavender wasn't the flashiest weapon, but it was dependable. The monks may not have understood germ theory, but they knew that lavender worked. It protected their books, their bodies, and maybe, just maybe, their souls. A bell tolls faintly from the chapel tower, a heavy, ponderous sound that seems to thud right into your chest. The gardens stir. A breeze picks up, and the lavender bends and sways, releasing fresh waves of scent, as if sighing in relief at the coolness. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the smell anchor you in time. Here, centuries blur. The lavender around you is the same lavender monks tended with callous hands and careful hearts. And while the world outside has moved on, cars, phones, antibiotics, the lavender endures, a silent, fragrant thread tying you back to a world that never really disappeared. You push open a smaller wooden door, its iron hinges shrieking like a cat who's just spotted a bath. Inside is the monastery's library, not the grand vaulted one for public admiration but the real working archive. The place where knowledge was hoarded like gold, except here the currency was ink and parchment, not coins. And, of course, lavender. The scent is even heavier here, richer, almost a physical thing pressing into your skin. You pause at the threshold, the air tasting of old paper, candle smoke, and the unmistakable herbal sharpness of lavender. In the dimness, you spot them, cloth sachets tied to bookcases, dried bundles dangling from beams, and even lavender scattered loosely across some desks as if the monks had simply given up and decided to carpet the place in petals. You shuffle in carefully, mindful of the low ceilings and stacks of precious manuscripts piled high on heavy tables. Back in the medieval period, books weren't mass-produced luxuries, they were labors of devotion. Each was written by hand, the script so tiny and perfect that you'd think monks had miniaturized their eyeballs. One wrong slip of the quill, one spattering of ink, and days of work could be ruined. No Ctrl+Z. But the real enemies weren't mistakes or smudges. They were bugs. Specifically, the bookworm, not an enthusiastic reader, but a catch-all term for a variety of insects that found parchment and the wood of book bindings delicious. Beetles, moth larvae, silverfish, they all had front-row seats to the all-you-can-eat buffet that was a medieval library. So the monks deployed their secret weapon, lavender. It wasn't just a pleasant backdrop, it was a chemical deterrent. Lavender contains compounds like linalool and camphor, natural repellents that many bugs can't stand. No sprays, no fumigation tints, just handfuls of this purple miracle tucked among the stacks. Historians still argue whether lavender was the most effective herb for this job or just the most accessible one, but there's no denying that monastic records reference it time and again. Along with rosemary, sage, and rue, lavender was part of an herbal arsenal designed to protect books from the slow, nibbling decay of pests. You lean closer to a thick, leather-bound tome, its cover cracked like old river mud. If you squint, you can see tiny pinprick holes along the edge, a reminder that lavender wasn't foolproof. Still, it was better than nothing. You imagine a monk, hunched and bleary-eyed, lifting his head from his work only to spot a telltale hole and sigh. Then, without much ceremony, reaching for another sprig of lavender to bolster the defenses. You brush your fingers lightly across a parchment sheet, marveling at the handiwork. Every letter is an artwork. Every page feels sacred. In these libraries, monks weren't just preserving religious texts but also medical treatises, scientific observations, ancient philosophies. This wasn't hoarding knowledge, it was time travel insurance. Lavender, in its small way, helped ensure that these fragile treasures didn't crumble to dust before they could be passed on. Yet the fight was never ending. Bugs adapted. Manuscripts rotted from moisture. Monks labored under brutal conditions, poor lighting, cold temperatures, and hours upon hours of meticulous, eye-straining work. There's even a quirky note in some old abbey inventories: lavender expenditures. Imagine budgeting not just for ink and quills but also for fresh batches of lavender. 10 bundles of lavender for pestilence prevention, scribbled in the margins like a medieval shopping list. Historians still argue whether these records were common across all monasteries or peculiar to particular regions more prone to infestations. And then there's the odd little detail you can't unsee once you know it. Monks sometimes crushed lavender into the binding paste itself. Yep! They'd blend lavender oils with the glue or use dried petals as filler, hoping to create a book that smelled sweet enough to repel bugs from the inside out. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a pine-scented air freshener, except your car is a 1,000-year-old manuscript. A creak behind you. You turn, half expecting a monk to materialize, but it's only the wood settling, the building breathing. The lavender hanging from the beams stirs slightly in the draft, releasing another wave of scent. You run your hand along the wood of a shelf worn smooth by centuries of use. Somewhere, in the fibers of this timber, lavender's essence is baked in, a scent so old it feels like it belongs to the stones themselves. Imagine it, a young monk, just tonsured, handed a broom and a bundle of lavender and told, "Protect the books." No glamour, no applause. Just the endless, quiet work of tending to fragile pages while the world outside waged its noisy wars. No wonder lavender became almost a symbol of monastic life, silent, sturdy, endlessly useful. You sigh, the sound absorbed by thick stone and thicker history. The monks fought a quiet war, and lavender was their unsung ally. You can't help but wonder, how many books survived because of it? How much knowledge, poetry, philosophy, medicine, theology, owes its life not to grand heroes but to the gentle crush of a purple bloom under a calloused thumb? The candle flickers, and for a moment, the scent seems to grow even stronger, a whisper from the past wrapping around you, as if to say, we're still here. You weave your way deeper into the library, the floorboards groaning under your cautious steps like they're tired of holding up centuries of secrets. The lavender clings to the air, wrapping around you until it feels less like a scent and more like a companion. A few more creaky strides and you notice something else, not the bite of lavender but a faint, sour undertone. Dampness. You wrinkle your nose. Here's the dirty truth the monks lived with every day. Moisture was their sworn enemy. Mold, mildew, and rot, silent assassins of books, loved the damp, cool interiors of monasteries as much as the monks did. Left unchecked, humidity could undo years of careful copying, turning prized manuscripts into soggy, crumbling relics. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it was a constant, existential threat. Back then, there were no dehumidifiers, no climate control. Keeping a library dry involved a mixture of strategy, prayers, and, yep, you guessed it, lavender. Lavender isn't just fragrant and insect repellent, it also has mild antifungal properties. The monks probably didn't know the science of it, no lab coats, no petri dishes, but they understood the effect. Bundles of lavender hung in libraries weren't just a deterrent for bugs, they also helped suppress mold growth. Historians still argue whether the lavender truly changed the moisture content of the air or simply masked the smell of decay, but its presence was consistent enough to make you think they were onto something. You trail a finger along the manuscript, marveling that it still exists despite the centuries conspiring against it. The pages are stiff, the ink faded, but the words endure. The war against damp was as relentless as the war against bugs, and monks had to be equally relentless in fighting back. Imagine their routine: candles lit just before dawn, a quick morning prayer, and then a sweep through the library to check for signs of moisture. Damp walls? Sprinkle powdered lavender. Musty air? Hang fresh bundles. Visible mold? Well, sometimes there wasn't much to do but scrub with vinegar and hope for the best. Some monks even burned dried lavender in small pots, letting the smoke waft through the stacks, a medieval attempt at fumigation. You stop at a heavy wooden desk, the surface pitted and scratched. A forgotten ink pot still sits in one corner, a relic of some long-ago scribe. Nearby, in a dusty niche of the wall, is a clay bowl filled with lavender buds, brittle with age. You lean in, catching the ghost of their scent. It's humbling, really. For all the grand cathedrals and glittering reliquaries medieval monks created, their libraries, small, dim, practical, were their true sanctuaries. And lavender was part of the architecture, as vital as the stone and wood. Here's something quirky you might appreciate. In some monasteries, monks believed that lavender could not only preserve their books but also protect their minds. They thought the scent sharpened memory and focus. A fringe theory, sure, but not as wild as it sounds. Modern science has found that lavender's aroma can indeed reduce stress and even boost concentration. Historians still argue whether monks had an empirical sense of this effect or if it was pure superstition, but either way, they trusted the flower. You glance around, noticing the cleverness of their system. Lavender bundles hung from low beams where the air was thickest. Bowls of dried petals were placed in shadowy corners where mold liked to creep. Even the placement of windows and vents showed strategy, allowing in just enough light and breeze to stave off damp without letting the precious manuscripts bake or bleach in the sun. It wasn't foolproof. Nothing ever was. But it worked well enough. Many of the manuscripts you would now find locked in glass cases at national libraries or museums survived not just because of human care, but because of lavender's stubborn, purple resilience. And the monks themselves? They didn't just smell lavender all day, they practically lived in it. Their robes, their bedding, their food stores, all were seasoned with that scent. There are records from the period suggesting that monks tucked lavender into their pillows to fend off lice and encourage restful sleep. No surprise that some historians jokingly refer to the medieval monk as the original lavender influencer. As you pace the narrow aisles between shelves, it occurs to you how much was at stake. A single outbreak of mold could wipe out irreplaceable works, histories of kings, treatises on medicine, theological debates, ancient philosophies. Libraries were finite then, every book was one of a kind, irreplaceable. To lose even a single one was a catastrophe. You pause, listening to the creaks and sighs of the ancient library, feeling the presence of those monks who fought, day after day, to protect what mattered most. Not with swords or sermons, but with diligent hands and the patient, persistent power of lavender. And though the monks have long since crumbled into dust, the lavender lingers, a fragile yet unyielding testimony to their devotion. You drift onward, each step muffled by centuries of dust and devotion, until you find yourself at the far end of the library. Here, under the arch of a narrow stained-glass window, a monk sits cross-legged, grinding something between two stones. You lean closer, half expecting him to dissolve into mist. It's not a monk, it's a statue. The hands are worn smooth from centuries of touch, but the object he cradles is still distinct, a bundle of lavender stems. You kneel down, tracing the carved blooms. They aren't just decorative, they're symbolic, representing not beauty but protection, protection that came from the power of scent. You stay low, inhaling deeply. The smell clings everywhere. If you had to guess, it's soaked into the wood, the parchment, the stones themselves. The monk's battle against decay wasn't just fought with strategy, it was fought with simple, everyday rituals. And lavender wasn't just a passive presence, it was activated, daily and deliberately. You watch in your mind's eye as a monk picks a stem of lavender, presses it between calloused fingers, and releases the oils into the air. This wasn't for relaxation or aesthetic pleasure, it was calculated. Crushing lavender released its potent oils, making its protective properties more aggressive. It was sent as a shield, silent, invisible, yet fiercely effective. Imagine the rhythm of it: crush, sniff, scatter. A simple, almost mindless ritual that kept pests and rot at bay. Lavender oils, even in the crude medieval way they were used, could deter moths, lice, fleas, and even some types of mold. No need for complicated machinery or arcane knowledge, just a few sprigs and a steady hand. Historians still argue whether the practice of crushing lavender daily was a widespread monastic ritual or a habit particular to certain more fastidious orders. Some records suggest it became part of the monks' daily chores, listed right alongside sweeping the cloisters and copying manuscripts. Imagine that. Your job description includes not only prayer and labor but also regular lavender maintenance. It's easy to romanticize it now, but life back then was brutal. The average monk woke before dawn, prayed for hours, worked with cramped hands in freezing scriptoriums, ate a diet so simple it made modern minimalism look decadent, and endured sickness and death as constants. The lavender? It was one small luxury, one small defense against a world that seemed designed to erode both body and spirit. You reach out to a low wooden shelf and find a small, hollowed-out bowl still clinging to a few shriveled lavender buds, gray with age. You scoop some up, feeling the brittle petals crumble in your hand. Even now, there's a faint scent, a whisper from the past. You crush it gently, and the air releases a tired sigh of lavender once again. There's a quirky tidbit you might not expect. Monks didn't stop at using lavender for pest control. Some took it further, distilling what crude oils they could and blending them into balms and ointments. Lavender salves were rubbed onto sore muscles, temples, and even used as a rudimentary remedy for insomnia. Not that monks got much sleep. Life in a monastery was more about sleep deprivation than 8 restful hours. You picture it, after a long day of back-breaking copying and endless prayer, a monk rubs a little lavender oil into his temples, the smell cutting through the sweat and candle smoke. A small, sweet mercy before the next matins bell rouses him from what little rest he's found. Even the placement of lavender was strategic. You glance up and notice how it hangs at precise intervals, near doors, near windows, anywhere the air moves. The monks weren't just scattering it at random, they understood that drafts carried both pests and damp. Lavender wasn't just about presence, it was about position. Historians still argue whether they mapped it out methodically or relied on instinct, but standing here, it's hard to believe it was anything less than a carefully honed system. And the scent itself? To you, it's calming. To a medieval monk, It was an invisible guardian, a constant background hum of defense against forces both physical and, perhaps, spiritual. You can almost hear the scratch of quills resuming, the soft rustle of parchment turning, as monks, surrounded by lavender, continued their silent work. The world outside the monastery might rage with wars and plagues, but inside these walls, the scent of crushed lavender was a quiet rebellion against entropy. The statue watches over you, serene and eternal, a reminder that the battle fought here was not of blood and swords but of ink, parchment, patience, and a purple flower with a stubborn will to protect. You rise slowly, your knees creaking in sympathy with the ancient wood beneath your feet. The lavender's perfume clings stubbornly to your clothes now, as if it's claimed you, one more disciple in its age-old congregation. You follow a narrow hallway leading away from the library, the corridor dim and heavy with history. The door at the end of the passage yields with a groan, and you find yourself in the monastery's herbarium, a place not of prayer or study but of craft and healing. The smell here is sharper, more complicated. Lavender, yes, but mingled now with mint, rosemary, sage, and something deeper, earthy, almost musky. The herbarium is less orderly than the library. Wooden tables sag under the weight of ceramic jars and bundles of drying herbs. The walls are plastered with scribbled diagrams, crude drawings of plants with Latin names scrawled underneath. And in the center of it all? Lavender, dried and bundled, stacked high like firewood against one wall. You step closer. Some bundles are bound tightly, others loosely, depending on their intended use. Here, lavender wasn't just a book guardian or a pest repellent, it was a medicine chest all its own. Monks were the doctors of their day, patching up the sick and the wounded with little more than herbal knowledge and stubbornness. They believed lavender had near magical properties. It could soothe headaches, calm anxiety, treat burns, and even chase away the melancholia that stalked many a soul in the long, dark medieval winters. There's an apothecary's bench nearby, the wood stained dark with centuries of use. A mortar and pestle sit ready, specks of dried lavender clinging to the stone. You imagine a monk in a rough spun robe, grinding lavender into fine powder to mix into poultices or teas. A simple operation, but one that could make the difference between life and death, or at least between unbearable pain and manageable discomfort. A scroll catches your eye, pinned haphazardly to the wall. It's an inventory, written in a shaky hand. Lavender, 6 bundles. Mint, 4. Comfrey, 2. Beneath it, a note scrawled as an afterthought, for the relief of spirits and fevers. Historians still argue whether these lists were strict medical guides or just helpful reminders in a world without pharmacies, but either way, they offer a glimpse into the monk's day-to-day battles against illness. You pick up a thin, brittle book from a shelf nearby, a manual of remedies. The script is dense, the Latin heavy. But there it is, tucked in among recipes for vinegar tinctures and honey tonics, a section on lavender. Infused in oil for muscle pains. Boiled in wine for colds. Crushed and inhaled to ease sorrow. The medieval multi-tool. The room is not without its quirks. In one corner, a dusty jar labeled Lavandula monastica sits proudly, as if the monks had rebranded the flower just for themselves. You smile, imagining a monk marketing his lavender concoctions as the ultimate cure-all, long before snake oil salesmen made a business of it. And yes, sometimes the monk's faith in lavender strayed into magical thinking. Some believed it could ward off the evil eye or even cleanse the soul. Not officially sanctioned theology, perhaps, but when the world is as perilous as theirs was, full of plagues, famines, wars, you might start believing a fragrant flower could fend off more than just fleas. Historians still argue whether lavender's spiritual reputation was driven by its genuine calming effects or by sheer desperate hope, but either way, it earned its place in the monastery's arsenal. You lift a small pouch from a table, the leather cracked and delicate. Inside, dried lavender buds, crumbled almost to dust. A medieval monk's equivalent of carrying ibuprofen in your pocket. Maybe he tucked it under his pillow, or wore it around his neck, or simply carried it as a charm against the unseeable dangers that prowled beyond these stone walls. The herbarium is not a sterile place. It's messy, human, alive with the lingering energy of those who once fought their quiet, losing battles against disease and decay. Lavender wasn't a miracle, but sometimes it was enough. Enough to ease a fevered brow, calm a racing heart, soothe an aching muscle. Enough to make the unbearable just a bit more bearable. You inhale deeply, the lavender grounding you once again. Here, among the crushed leaves and cracked pots, You feel closer to those monks than any illuminated manuscript could bring you. They fought not for glory, not for gold, but for survival, and Lavender was a loyal, if humble, ally. You step back toward the door, glancing over your shoulder one last time. The bundles of lavender sway slightly in the draft, whispering a farewell. You slip out of the herbarium and find yourself back in the cloister walk, the stone floor cool beneath your feet, the evening air brushing past you with a chill sharp enough to sting. But there it is again, that thread of lavender, persistent, wrapping itself around the damp and the dusk as if refusing to be forgotten. You follow it, nose twitching, and before long you reach a small annex, quieter even than the library. Inside, a monk sits alone, bent low over a piece of parchment. His quill moves in slow, deliberate strokes, scratching out words in a hand so steady it could only belong to someone used to this kind of labor. Except, this isn't just any scriptorium, it's the working scriptorium, the place where the real grind happens, night after night. The room smells intensely of lavender, so thick it almost stings your nose. You realize why as you step closer. Crushed lavender, piled in bowls at every desk, rubbed into the wood itself until the scent radiates from the very grain. The monks here have weaponized lavender in a new way, not just against bugs or mold but against something even harder to fight, exhaustion. Imagine spending 12 hours a day hunched over rough parchment, copying endless lines of Latin text by flickering candlelight. Eye strain wasn't a maybe, it was a guarantee. Headaches, muscle cramps, and a creeping sense of despair weren't just occupational hazards, they were daily visitors. And lavender? Lavender was their secret weapon. It wasn't just about protecting the precious pages from insects and mildew. Lavender's sharp, clean scent acted like a medieval energy drink. It refreshed the air, cleared the mind, and provided a momentary break from the thick fog of fatigue that settled over the scriptorium like an old, heavy blanket. Modern studies have confirmed what those monks probably learned the hard way. Lavender's scent can boost concentration and reduce anxiety. Historians still argue whether medieval monks understood this effect consciously or simply learned by trial and error, but the result was the same, lavender as a kind of olfactory stimulant. You watch as the monk pauses, leans back, and lifts a sprig of lavender to his nose, inhaling deeply. His eyes flutter shut for a moment, a private ritual, and then he leans back and to continue his work, quill scratching steadily onward. There's even a quirky practice whispered about in monastic circles, rubbing lavender oil onto the temples to ward off the devil's weariness. Not official doctrine, of course, church authorities frown on anything that smelled too much like superstition, but widespread enough to leave traces in the margins of old monastic rulebooks. You trail your fingers along one of the desks, feeling the indentations worn deep by restless, ink-stained hands. A small depression in the wood, right where a bowl of lavender might have sat for years, catching bits of dust, bits of prayer, bits of weariness. The scriptorium is quiet except for the faint scratch of quill on parchment and the soft rustle of robes as monks shift, stretch, and settle back into their long, silent battle. A battle not fought with swords but with ink and patience, with lavender their tireless, fragrant companion. Historians still debate whether monks saw lavender as merely practical or if they attributed to it a kind of sanctity, a bridge between the body's needs and the soul's aspirations. After all, wasn't the point of all this work to preserve knowledge, to glorify God, to deny the body and exalt the spirit? And yet here they were, acknowledging in their own quiet way that the body needed tending, too. You catch sight of an open window, its shutters propped just enough to let in a whisper of night air. Lavender hangs there too, in a modest bundle tied with twine, swinging gently in the breeze. Not just for scent but as a kind of quiet benediction, an anointing of the very air the monks breathed. There's a candle guttering near one of the monks, and as the flame flares and dims, the air fills with the warm scent of beeswax and burning lavender oil. You close your eyes, just for a moment, and imagine the centuries collapsing, the monks before you, and before them still, all breathing in this same lavender-sweetened air, all chasing the same impossible dream of perfection, one painstaking letter at a time. Lavender wasn't just a tool. It was a companion in their solitude, a small mercy in their struggle, a steady hand in the quiet war against time, fatigue, and the slow erosion of memory. You step back into the corridor, the scent trailing after you like a blessing. The night is thicker now, darker, but the lavender lingers, a reminder that some battles are fought not with noise and fury, but with silence, patience, and a handful of purple blooms. The corridor narrows as you move away from the scriptorium, the scent of lavender clinging stubbornly to the folds of your clothes. You press onward, the stone walls cool under your fingertips, leading you toward another chamber, smaller and round, where the air grows oddly sweeter, more perfumed, almost ritualistic. You duck through a low archway and find yourself in what feels like a shrine. But not to a saint or relic, no, this is a shrine to something less tangible, scent itself. The room is circular, with tall, slender windows that barely let in any moonlight. And all around the perimeter, neat rows of clay pots and bundles of dried herbs hang from the rafters like upside-down chandeliers. Front and center? Lavender. It dominates the space, its purple-blue hues faded but still defiant against the weight of time. Mixed among it are rosemary, sage, and frankincense, but lavender claims the lion's share of attention. This, you realize, was not just a storage room. It was a place of preparation, where monks gathered herbs not merely for healing or for protection but for something deeper, a communion of the senses, a ladder to the divine. See, monks believed that scents weren't just pleasant distractions, they were bridges. Bridges between the earthly and the heavenly. Inhaling certain fragrances, especially those as pure and calming as lavender, was seen as a way to elevate the mind, sharpen prayer, focus meditation. It wasn't enough to kneel and recite, you had to feel the presence of the divine, and lavender was thought to help carry you there. Historians still argue whether monks officially sanctioned this olfactory theology or if it flourished more quietly, a kind of unspoken understanding among those who spent their days and nights chasing holiness. What's certain is that medieval people placed immense spiritual value on the senses, smell most of all. You step lightly toward a small altar at the room's center. It's simple, unadorned, except for a bowl of what looks like crushed lavender mixed with ashes. A censer hangs above it, a device for burning incense during prayer. Imagine lavender smoke curling through the high arches of a chapel, not merely masking the rank smell of unwashed bodies and damp stone, but sanctifying the air itself. There's a fringe theory that in certain monasteries, monks devised entire scent calendars, where different herbs were burned at different times of year to align with spiritual seasons. Lavender, with its calming properties, would have been ideal during Lent, a season of reflection and penitence. Whether this was a widespread practice or a localized custom remains hotly debated by historians who specialize in the odd corners of monastic life. You reach out and brush your fingers over one of the bundles. It crackles faintly under your touch, but as the stems crumble, the room seems to breathe out a fresh wave of lavender, subtle but insistent. Even now, even after centuries of decay, the scent endures. Think about it, in a world without antiseptics, air fresheners, or the cozy comfort of a vanilla-scented candle, lavender was an entire sensory experience. It wasn't just about smelling good. It was about redefining a space, reclaiming it from rot, from fear, from the brutal reality of medieval existence. You imagine a monk sitting here in the early morning, crushing lavender and whispering prayers. Maybe he believed that with each breath, each inhalation of that sweet, sharp scent, he was inching closer to the divine. Not through grand acts of martyrdom or lofty theological debate, but through the humble, earthy ritual of scent. Of course, not all monks bought into the mystical properties of lavender. Some treated it with the same practical reverence as any tool, useful, effective, but not holy. Historians still argue whether lavender's spiritual significance was mainstream or marginal, but here, in this room heavy with its perfume, you can't help but feel the weight of belief. You sit for a moment on a low wooden bench, letting the silence and the scent wrap around you. It's not the sterile, sanitized lavender of modern times. This is richer, earthier, touched by centuries of use and meaning. A lavender that has witnessed not just the prayers and the labor, but the quiet doubts and desperate hopes of monks who longed for connection with something greater than themselves. As you rise to leave, you notice small carvings in the wooden beams, simple designs, crosses, vines, a few symbols whose meanings are lost to time. Maybe they're just decorations. Or maybe they're prayers in another form, carved by monks who understood that the divine could be sought not only in grand cathedrals but also in the grain of wood, the crush of petals, the lift of scent into the still air. You slip back into the corridor, the heavy wooden door closing behind you with a sigh. The lavender scent lingers, not cloying but persistent, a reminder that some bridges between worlds are built not of stone or gold but of the simplest, humblest things. The corridor curves ahead like a lazy river, and you follow its bend, the lavender clinging to you now like an invisible shawl. It softens the damp chill on the air, lending a kind of padded quietness to each step you take. Before long, you emerge into a cloister garden, bathed in the soft blue shadow of the evening. You pause at the threshold. This isn't a wild garden or a scattered herb patch. No, this is something far more deliberate. Rows and rows of lavender, neatly plotted, each bush equidistant from the next with an almost mathematical precision. Their orderly placement contrasts sharply with the otherwise unruly, overgrown world beyond the monastery walls. You step carefully into the garden, the scent thicker here than anywhere else yet somehow less aggressive, softer, more nuanced. The lavender plants are mature, their stems woody, their blooms just beginning to silver with the touch of twilight. Monks weren't gardeners for aesthetics. They were gardeners for necessity, and precision was their gospel. Here, in this geometric maze of lavender, you realize how deeply that belief extended even to their plants. The monks knew that growing lavender wasn't just about having a supply for their libraries and infirmaries. It was about optimizing it. Lavender needs certain conditions to thrive: sunlight, well-drained soil, a touch of neglect. Too much fuss and it rots, too little care and it withers. The monks, with their keen observational skills and endless patience, became experts at coaxing lavender into its fullest potential. They plotted it carefully, ensuring that air circulated freely between plants, preventing the dreaded damp and mildew from taking hold. Historians still argue whether the monks adopted these meticulous planting patterns from ancient Roman agricultural texts or developed them independently. Either way, they turned lavender gardening into a disciplined science long before botany became a formal field. You crouch beside a bush and brush your fingers along its silvery leaves. The plant feels sturdy, resilient, the kind of thing that survives not just because of its nature, but because someone cared enough to understand it deeply. Another little-known quirk? Monks often alternated lavender with companion plants like rosemary and sage, creating a natural pest repellent system. No pesticides, no chemical fertilizers, just the careful balancing act of nature working with itself. Lavender's strong scent masked the more vulnerable herbs, protecting them from the sharp teeth of insects that would otherwise feast unchecked. And the garden's layout wasn't merely about maximizing yield. Some scholars suggest that monks saw the very act of gardening as a form of prayer. Each careful row of lavender, each precisely spaced plant, was a physical manifestation of divine order. To tend the earth was to reflect the heavens. You pace along the rows, the geometry tightening around you. It's oddly meditative, walking this maze of scent and shadow. Your steps find a rhythm, your thoughts a kind of silence, as though the lavender insists on it. It's not hard to imagine a monk here at dawn, pruning and weeding, murmuring psalms under his breath as he worked, the scent of crushed blooms rising with the morning mist. A fringe theory whispers among scholars that the gardens themselves were designed not just for function but as meditative labyrinths, places where monks could walk slowly, reflect, pray, and inhale the calming balm of lavender all the while. Historians still argue whether the patterns in certain cloister gardens were intentional labyrinths or simply practical plantings, but standing here, the symmetry feels deliberate, almost sacred. You stop at the center of the garden where a stone bench rests under an ancient oak tree. Beside it, a small stone marker etched faintly with words in Latin. Time has worn them down, but you can make out a few, in silentio et spe erit fortitudo vestra. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength. You sink onto the bench. The lavender hums around you, alive with bees even this late in the day, their work unending. The garden breathes with a life of its own, a quiet, persistent life, built on careful hands and centuries of devotion. You tilt your head back, letting your gaze slip from the lavender to the sky above. It's a deep, rich blue now, the stars just beginning to emerge. The monks lived their lives bound by time and season, by prayer bells and planting cycles, but they found a way to weave lavender into all of it, a small, stubborn grace. You close your eyes for a moment, breathing in deeply, letting the scent fill your lungs, your mind. Here, in this patch of earth, the monks' care, their science, their belief, all of it lingers. Lavender wasn't just a plant. It was a promise. A promise that even in a world of chaos and decay, there could be order, beauty, and peace, if only you were willing to kneel down, get your hands dirty, and tend it. You rise from the stone bench, a little stiff but strangely lighter, as if the lavender-laced air has worked some quiet miracle on your tired bones. The garden's rows seem to nudge you along, guiding you toward another shadowed archway tucked into the far wall. You duck inside and immediately feel the temperature drop. The wall's narrow, and ahead you spot rows of small desks lit by the flicker of oil lamps. Welcome to the scriptorium proper, the heart of the monastery's intellectual life. You move silently, the thick air carrying the scent of parchment, wax, and, yes, lavender, always lavender. It clings to the very stones here. Bundles hang above the desks like little purple sentinels, and sachets are tucked into corners where the drafts creep in. The monks knew their enemy well, time. Time that eroded the mind, dulled the eyes, and wore down even the sturdiest spirits. The scriptorium was a brutal place. No romantic quill-and-scroll glamour here. You'd be lucky to get a decent breeze, your only illumination a feeble flame. Hours were spent hunched over text, each letter a labor, each page a battlefield between ink and imperfection. Eye strain was rampant. Headaches, constant. Back pain? A permanent souvenir. And yet they worked. Day after day. Word after word. Lavender wasn't just sitting in bundles for the bugs, it was their silent comrade in this physical and mental slog. Its scent was thought to soothe strained eyes, to clear foggy minds, and to steady trembling hands. Inhaling it was like a small reset button, nature's caffeine, but without the crash. Modern science would later confirm that lavender's compounds, like linalool and linalool acetate, have calming effects on the nervous system. Lower stress levels, improved concentration, even mild pain relief. Historians still argue whether monks consciously understood these benefits or simply stumbled into them through centuries of trial and blessed error. Either way, it became an indispensable part of their routine. You kneel beside a desk, noticing grooves etched into the surface, marks worn by quills, impatient fingers, perhaps even a forehead pressed down in exhausted prayer. Tucked into the edge is a small linen pouch, its fabric yellowed but still intact. You lift it gently. The faintest crumble of lavender dust escapes. You wonder how many hands fidgeted with this little charm, drawing comfort from its familiar scent during long, dark vigils. Not that lavender was a miracle cure. Even with its help, monks suffered. Medieval life didn't come with ergonomic chairs or anti-glare screens. The work was brutal, and so were the consequences. Some monks went blind from years of squinting at cramped text. Others developed chronic illnesses, what today might be diagnosed as repetitive strain injuries or migraines. A quirky detail? Some monastic records suggest monks were given extra lavender bundles as a sort of reward or care package when they fell ill or completed particularly grueling copying projects. Lavender was more than a workplace perk, it was a token of survival. You stroll slowly down the rows, imagining the rhythmic scratch of quills, the sighs of fatigue, the whispered prayers tangled in the lavender-scented air. Knowledge wasn't just passed down here, it was fought for, letter by painstaking letter. And lavender wasn't merely a silent observer. It was woven into the very fabric of this place, rubbed into it to repel bugs, burned to cleanse the air, bundled to soothe the mind. A humble flower elevated into an essential tool of monastic life. Historians still debate whether the monks believed lavender had a divine endorsement, whether its ability to ease their burdens was seen as a little gift from God himself. Some argue that its use was purely practical, others that it blurred the lines between earthly toil and spiritual grace. You suspect the truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. You run a hand along a row of codices, their leather bindings worn soft and familiar. Without lavender, without this small but vital intervention, how many of these precious volumes would have rotted away? How many lines of history, philosophy, poetry, prayer would have been lost, devoured by insects or mildewed beyond recognition? You close your eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, and feel the lavender wind through you, as it did through them, easing the weight of centuries, softening the sharp edges of hard, endless work. When you open your eyes, the room feels less like a graveyard of old books and more like a cathedral of human endurance. Each volume, each page, each letter a testament to what can be accomplished with patience, faith, and a handful of purple blooms. You step back into the corridor, the hush of the scriptorium falling behind you like a heavy, fragrant curtain. Ahead, the faint sound of chanting rises on the lavender-laden air, pulling you onward. The corridor twists gently, drawing you onward like a whispered invitation. The scent of lavender is softer here, not quite so overwhelming, as if giving way to something more elusive. You follow the sound of low chanting, a steady hum like the heartbeat of the monastery itself. As you emerge from the narrow passage, you find yourself in a cloistered courtyard, half shadowed by the tall walls that ring it. Moonlight spills across the flagstones in pale ribbons. But what catches your attention isn't the stones or the worn benches, it's the garden at the center, and more specifically, the strange, almost mathematical pattern woven into the lavender beds. From where you stand, it looks ordinary, rows of lavender carefully maintained, their silvery leaves flickering in the breeze. But as you step closer, you realize the paths don't just meander aimlessly. They twist and turn with careful intention, folding back on themselves, leading to a center that you can't quite see from here. The garden is a labyrinth. And not just any labyrinth, this one seems designed with a dual purpose, meditation and protection. As you walk slowly into it, feet crunching softly on the gravel, the lavender brushes against your robes, releasing bursts of scent that fill the cool night air. Historians still argue whether medieval labyrinth gardens were primarily spiritual tools, representing the winding path to salvation, or practical designs to encourage quiet reflection and contemplation. In monastic life, where hours stretched endlessly and the line between devotion and repetition blurred, walking a labyrinth like this could serve as a moving prayer, a meditation in motion. But there's a fringe theory that in some monasteries, these lavender labyrinths held a secondary, more secret purpose, protecting sacred knowledge. Think about it. Lavender repelled insects, true, but perhaps monks believed it repelled more than just the physical pests. Maybe they thought the labyrinth itself, with lavender as its sacred wall, formed a barrier against spiritual corruption or even theft, keeping the library, and the secrets within it, safe from prying eyes and unworthy hands. You wind deeper into the labyrinth, and the scent intensifies, wrapping around you in waves. It's strangely hypnotic. Your breathing slows. Your thoughts quiet. Lavender isn't just a smell anymore, it's a presence, filling the space between your footsteps and the murmured chanting still drifting on the breeze. As you reach the center, you find a small stone pedestal, plain and unadorned save for a single carved inscription worn faint by time. You squint to read it, Via Silentiae et Flores, the way of silence and the flower. It's a reminder that in the monk's world, silence wasn't emptiness, it was a form of worship. And the lavender? The flower was not just a plant, it was a participant in that worship, an offering as real and potent as any psalm or prayer. You sit on the low stone curb ringing the pedestal and let your fingers trail through the nearest lavender bush. The blooms are sticky with resin, the leaves rough under your touch. It's humbling to think of the care that went into planting and maintaining this garden. Monks didn't just throw seeds and hope for the best. They planted meticulously, spacing the plants so air could flow, pruning them to ensure strong growth, harvesting just before full bloom for the most potent oils. There's something beautifully ironic about it. They cultivated lavender for its practical uses, repelling pests, preserving books, calming minds, but in doing so, they created spaces of unexpected beauty and deep spiritual resonance. You imagine a monk, weary from hours in the scriptorium, stepping into this labyrinth to walk off his aches and doubts. Every step releasing lavender's balm into the air, every turn of the path a reminder that progress isn't always straight or swift. Some journeys, like some prayers, are meant to be winding. Historians still argue whether these labyrinths were mapped according to sacred geometry or merely followed the whims of the monk's practical instincts. Either way, standing here now, you feel the design's quiet power. It pulls you inward, not just physically but mentally, encouraging reflection, patience, and that ever-elusive stillness the monks sought so fervently. You close your eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, and the lavender seems to rise up around you, enfolding you in its soft, relentless embrace. It's a reminder of something the monks understood instinctively, that the body and the soul are not so easily separated. That tending a plant, crushing a flower, inhaling a scent, these simple acts can be doorways to the divine. As you retrace your steps out of the labyrinth, the chanting grows louder, the voices rising and falling like the tide. The lavender brushes your legs, your hands, each touch a small benediction. You glance back once at the labyrinth, its winding paths now half obscured by darkness, the lavender glowing faintly under the moonlight like the veins of the earth itself. And you understand, this wasn't just a garden. It was a prayer made flesh, a wall of scent and silence built not just to protect their books, but to protect their very souls. You leave the lavender labyrinth behind, its scent a lingering echo clinging to your skin, and follow the chant rising in steady, hypnotic waves. It pulls you across the cloister, through another small archway where the stones are polished smooth by centuries of quiet feet. Inside is the chapel, modest compared to grand cathedrals but still majestic in its own way. Narrow stained glass windows filter moonlight into pale pools across the floor. Candles line the altar, their flames dancing like shy conspirators. But it's the haze curling through the air that captures your attention first, a soft, shifting mist carrying that unmistakable fragrance. Lavender smoke. You step quietly toward the back, where a simple brazier stands, a low flame licking at bundles of dried lavender mixed with a pinch of resin. The smoke is delicate, almost weightless, winding upward in invisible threads toward the vaulted ceiling. The monks chant, voices blending and diverging like a slow river. Gregorian, low and heavy with centuries of tradition. You notice that the incense isn't the heavy, throat-clutching kind so often associated with grand rituals. This is gentler. Lavender's scent drifts with the smoke, more suggestion than proclamation. It doesn't overwhelm, it invites. Lavender wasn't just a daytime utility for these monks, it was woven into their worship. They burned it during vigils, particularly in long overnight prayers when fatigue gnawed at the edges of focus. The calming properties of lavender kept the mind steady, the body from collapsing into the arms of sleep. It was a spiritual companion, soothing but not sedating. Historians still argue whether lavender was a liturgical choice or a practical one. Incense was common in worship, sure, but frankincense and myrrh were expensive, imported luxuries. Lavender, growing right outside their doors, was the monks' incense of necessity. Yet over time, necessity blurred into ritual. Burning lavender became not just pragmatic but symbolic, a humble offering, a scented sacrifice. You slip into a bench at the back, the wooden seat hard and unforgiving beneath you. The chanting wraps around the smoke, or maybe it's the other way around. In the dim, shifting air, the world seems softer, quieter. You watch as a monk rises from his place near the altar and feeds another bundle of lavender into the brazier. The smoke thickens, and the scent sharpens briefly before settling again into that familiar, grounding balm. There's a strange comfort in it, the way the lavender anchors this sacred moment to the earthly senses. A bridge again, between body and spirit, time and eternity. A quirky note you might enjoy, some records suggest monks believed lavender smoke could carry prayers upward, infusing the petitions with a purity that made them more pleasing to divine ears. An aromatic fast track to heaven, if you will. Historians still argue how much of this belief was doctrine and how much was hopeful superstition, but it persisted in quiet corners of monastic life. You glance at the monks' faces, calm, focused, weathered by years of prayer and labor. The lavender smoke softens the hard lines, casting a faint shimmer around them as if the scent itself is a kind of benediction. They are, in this moment, suspended between worlds, and lavender is the rope holding them there. In a world where death hovered close, where plagues, wars, and famines were daily realities, the monks understood the need for little sanctuaries like this. The chapel, the chanting, the lavender smoke, all working together to create a space where the eternal didn't feel quite so distant. You close your eyes and inhale slowly. The lavender fills your lungs, your mind. It's not just pleasant, it's transporting. For a moment, the concerns of modern life, the noise, the rush, the endless to-do lists, fade into nothingness. There's only breath, scent, and the low rumble of ancient prayer. The monks chant on, their voices unwavering, and you realize that while the words they sing are old, almost incomprehensible, the feeling is timeless. Lavender smoke coils through the air, binding the past and present, the mundane and the divine, in a tender, fragrant embrace. When the chanting finally fades, the monks bow their heads, and a deep, living silence falls over the chapel. No words. Just the whisper of lavender smoke curling toward the stars. You rise quietly, reluctant to break the stillness, and slip back out into the cool night. The air beyond the chapel feels thinner, emptier somehow. But the lavender clings to you, tucked into the folds of your clothes, the corners of your mind, a souvenir of a simpler, more reverent world. The chapel's heavy wooden door creaks softly as you pull it closed behind you, sealing the lavender smoke and the echo of chants inside. You step out into the night air, cool and sharp, and for a moment the scent of lavender lingers around you like a ghost reluctant to say goodbye. The cloister lies quiet, moonlight painting its stone walkways silver. You follow the path toward the outer edges of the monastery where the walls grow thinner, less fortified, and the gardens wilder. Here, beyond the neat rows and tidy labyrinths, the monks kept other curiosities, the novelties brought home from far-off lands. Lavender wasn't native to these colder, damper climates. It was a traveler, an immigrant, hitching rides with conquerors and merchants, monks and pilgrims. Some say it came north with Roman legions, who scattered seeds like breadcrumbs across Europe. Others argue it spread later, along the dusty routes of crusaders returning from the Holy Land, laden with relics and strange, precious goods. Historians still argue whether monks were the first to cultivate lavender extensively in northern Europe or if they simply inherited and refined the practice from older, forgotten gardeners. What's undeniable is that they made it their own. You find yourself near a low shed built against the monastery's stone wall, half storage, half workshop. You push the door open and step into a treasure trove of curiosities. Dust motes swim in the beam of moonlight slicing through a high window. Bundles of herbs hang from every beam, their silhouettes skeletal and strange. Crates and sacks are piled along the walls, and every surface is cluttered with jars, pots, scrolls, and tools. A medieval version of a research lab. You run your fingers along the crates stamped with faded letters you barely recognize, some long-forgotten merchant's mark. Inside, you find glass bottles filled with oil, pungent and golden, still catching the light even through centuries of grime. One bottle, smaller and darker, is labeled Oleum Lavangeli, lavender oil. The monks here weren't content just to grow lavender, they experimented with it. Crude distillation methods allowed them to capture the essence of the plant, creating oils that were far more potent than simple dried bundles. These oils were mixed into salves, balms, and tinctures, stored in tiny bottles that could be slipped into a traveling monk's satchel, ready to be used as medicine, repellent, or even, perhaps, protection against more intangible threats. You pick up a small scroll half hidden under a sack of flax. It's a catalog, listing the monastery's imports, spices, silks, manuscripts, and seeds. Lots of seeds. From Syria, from Egypt, from places the monks only knew as distant, exotic names spoken in low, odd voices. Among them, tucked almost modestly between coriander and saffron, is lavangela. This wasn't just about survival. It was about knowledge. The monks sought it, gathered it, preserved it. Lavender wasn't just a flower, it was part of a greater exchange, a flow of ideas and practices that connected even this quiet monastery to the wider world. A reminder that even behind thick stone walls and strict vows of silence, the monks were not isolated. They were part of a network, a web of slow but steady communication that spread not just goods, but wisdom. You can imagine the excitement of a new seed shipment arriving. The careful unpacking, the whispered prayers over tiny pouches of foreign earth. The hope that these fragile imports would take root and flourish. The monks' gardens were not static, they were living testaments to curiosity and resilience. A quirky tidbit for you, some monasteries became so famous for their gardens and herbariums that they effectively acted as early botanical research centers. They traded not just goods but growing techniques, plant lore, and even experimental recipes for medicines. Lavender, with its remarkable resilience and versatile uses, quickly rose in stature within these whispered exchanges. Historians still argue how much the monks understood about the full medicinal properties of lavender, whether their knowledge was empirical or gleaned from ancient texts translated and retranslated until meaning blurred. What's clear is that they valued lavender enough to ensure it traveled far beyond its Mediterranean cradle, north, west, into colder, harsher climates where its sun-loving nature had to be coaxed and cajoled into thriving. You set the scroll gently back down and glance around the shed one last time. Each bottle, each sack of seeds, each faded scrap of parchment speaks to a world that was never as isolated as it might have seemed. The monks' lives were quiet, yes, but not small. They were gardeners not just of lavender, but of ideas, tending a legacy that would outlast them by centuries. You step back outside. The scent of lavender is fainter here, mingled with the sharper bite of night air. But it's there, still there, tracing the edges of the monastery like a careful signature, a whisper of all the journeys, all the experiments, all the small acts of devotion that carried it here and kept it thriving. You close the shed door behind you with a soft click, leaving the archive of seeds and secrets to slumber in the moonlight. The path winds back toward the heart of the monastery, and you follow it, feet brushing against the uneven stones worn smooth by centuries of sandals and bare soles. The lavender fields on either side are less tidy here, wilder, freer, as though these plants had been given permission to stretch and sprawl without the rigid control of monastic hands. And as you round the bend, you hear it, voices, low and urgent, not the sacred chants from earlier but something more worldly. You slow your pace, curiosity piqued, and peer around a crumbling stone pillar. A group of monks, clustered in the shadows, speaking in animated whispers. One of them gestures toward a patch of lavender with a possessive, almost defiant sweep of his hand. You ease closer, careful not to disturb the gravel beneath your feet. It seems absurd at first, grown men, monks no less, locked in a debate over lavender. But listen closely, and you realize it's not just about the plant. It's about whose lavender is superior. Who grew the most potent, the most resilient, the most fragrant. Welcome to the great medieval lavender arms race. Historians still argue how widespread these competitions were, but scattered records hint at fierce, if discreet, rivalries between monasteries. Gardens were more than just practical necessities, they were points of pride, living proof of a monastery's skill, discipline, and perhaps a wink of divine favor. Lavender was the crown jewel. Monasteries boasted about the richness of their blooms, the clarity of their oils, the longevity of their dried bundles. Visitors might be politely shown the library or the chapel, but the lavender fields? Those were shown with a touch more swagger. You imagine a traveling monk arriving from another abbey, politely admiring the cloisters before being casually led to the lavender garden, where the local monks would humbly point out how their plants thrived in poor soil, resisted mold better, produced oils purer than spring water. A modest little flex, medieval style. In fact, there's a delightful anecdote from one particularly competitive abbey. Monks allegedly timed their lavender harvests to coincide with visiting dignitaries, ensuring that the fields were at peak bloom, a sea of violet under the high summer sun. Subtle? No. Effective? Absolutely. And woe to the monk who tried to smuggle out seeds or cuttings from a rival's prize patch. While monks took vows of poverty and humility, there were limits, apparently, when it came to horticultural espionage. Fringe theories even suggest that some monasteries employed secret gardening techniques, special compost blends, careful breeding of stronger strains, tightly guarded and passed down only to the most trusted brothers. You watch as the monks in front of you reach an unspoken agreement, some combination of resignation and pride settling over them. One claps another on the back, and they disperse into the shadows, their lavender argument tabled for another night. You slip past where they stood and kneel beside the patch they were so hotly defending. The lavender here is robust, taller than the plants you saw in the main garden, its blooms dense and rich. You pinch a stem lightly between your fingers, releasing a sharper, more pungent burst of scent. It's different. Stronger, less sweet, more medicinal. You smile. No wonder they were proud, and no wonder their rivals would be envious. You straighten, brushing your hands on your robes, and glance around at the quiet monastery. Imagine it by day, alive with silent rivalries and not-so-silent boasts. Monks measuring stock heights like rival farmers at a county fair, debating oil yields over supper with the same seriousness they might debate theology. Historians still argue whether such rivalries were encouraged as a way to push innovation or simply tolerated as an inevitable human quirk. But standing here, it's clear that competition, gentle, mischievous, and very human, had its place even behind these solemn stone walls. A quirky footnote for you: some monasteries supposedly sent dried bundles of lavender as gifts to rival abbeys, the monastic equivalent of a mic drop. Here's our lavender, blessed and dried, good luck matching this next season. You shake your head with a chuckle, imagining the stiff politeness of the thank you letters, the tight smiles at the next communal gathering. All in the spirit of brotherhood, of course. And yet, beneath the jest, there was real pride, and real skill. The lavender wasn't just a symbol of one-upmanship, it was a testament to the monks' dedication, their patient tending, their deep, instinctive understanding of nature's quiet, stubborn rhythms. You step back onto the path, the night stretching out cool and still around you. The wild lavender rustles softly in the breeze, and for a moment, you could swear it sounds like laughter, the low, conspiratorial chuckle of monks who knew that even in the most sacred pursuits, there's always room for a little competition. The gravel path crunches underfoot as you leave the lavender patch behind, the echoes of monastic rivalries fading into the hush of the night. The monastery seems quieter now, the walls heavy with sleep. Only the stars above and the scent of lavender remain faithfully awake. You wander toward a more secluded corner of the grounds, led by curiosity, or perhaps by that stubborn pull lavender seems to have. The air here is heavier, thicker somehow, and the moonlight reveals another small stone building, tucked nearly out of sight. Its wooden door is slightly ajar, just enough to beckon you inside. You step over the threshold and pause. The room is darker, the air sharp with the unmistakable tang of herbs, and something deeper, something almost electric. Along the walls are shelves crowded with jars, scrolls, and bundles of dried plants. At the center sits a heavy table stained with spills and scorch marks. This isn't a library or a garden shed. This is the monk's alchemical workshop. You grin despite yourself. Of course they dabbled. Monks in the medieval period weren't just scribes and gardeners. They were also some of the era's most devoted scientists, or proto-scientists, if you like. Their work blurred the lines between practical herbalism and the more mysterious arts of alchemy. Historians still argue whether what they practiced should be called early chemistry or simply high-level superstition. Either way, monks weren't shy about experimenting. And lavender? Lavender was a prime ingredient. You run your fingers along a heavy mortar and pestle, imagining it grinding not just lavender buds but entire theories into dust. Some monks attempted to distill lavender into oils so pure they were believed to hold medicinal, or even magical, properties. Lavender wasn't just a plant to them, it was a catalyst, a key that might unlock greater mysteries. There's a curious bundle lying open on the table, an old, cracked manuscript, its Latin script spidery and precise. You scan the text. It's a list of elixirs and tonics, some fairly standard, lavender boiled in wine for a cough, others, less so. One recipe calls for lavender infused with mercury and ground pearls, promising clarity of vision and purity of heart. You grimace. Even lavender can't fix mercury poisoning, but medieval monks didn't know that. There's a fringe theory that some monasteries strayed dangerously close to forbidden magic in their experiments. Lavender, with its soothing yet potent qualities, found itself at the center of concoctions that blurred the sacred and the profane. Tinctures designed not just to heal, but to divine the future, to reveal hidden truths, to communicate with the divine, or worse, to control it. Historians still argue where the line was drawn, how much was tolerated, and how much was quietly overlooked so long as it didn't interfere with prayer and obedience. But one thing is clear, behind closed doors, in workshops like this, monks pursued knowledge with a hunger that sometimes edged into perilous territory. You shift your attention to the shelves, crowded with clay pots and glass vials. You spot one filled with a viscous, honey-colored liquid. The faintest label remains, Oleum lavangeli purissimum, purest lavender oil. You unstopped it carefully and sniff. The scent is almost dizzying in its intensity, sweet, sharp, almost medicinal. Imagine concentrating an entire field of lavender into a single breath. No wonder they believed it had power beyond the physical. A quirky historical footnote. Lavender oil was sometimes mixed into ink, a little secret recipe thought to protect manuscripts not just from pests but from corruption, physical and perhaps even moral. A monk could write pages filled with prayers and psalms, the lavender scent weaving through the letters like a protective charm. Not exactly FDA approved, but charming nonetheless. You set the vial down and glance around the dim room. Imagine it at its busiest, the scratch of quills, the clink of glass, the low murmur of Latin prayers mingling with whispered speculations. The monks, robed and wary, chasing truths they barely understood, guided by faith, fear, and a little bit of lavender. The work wasn't sanctioned. At least not officially. But knowledge was sacred, even if its boundaries weren't always clear. Lavender was the perfect symbol for their ambitions, earthy yet elevated, simple yet mysterious, mundane yet magical. You step outside, pulling the door closed behind you with a soft click. The cool air feels fresher after the dense, heady atmosphere of the workshop. You breathe in deeply, and there it is again, the lavender, softer now, tempered by the clean night air. You smile to yourself. In the end, the monks weren't so different from anyone else reaching beyond what they know, trying to make sense of a world that refuses to explain itself. Only instead of laboratories, they had cloisters. Instead of white coats, they had habits. And instead of test tubes, they had lavender. The stars above wheel slowly across the sky, and you turn back toward the heart of the monastery. Somewhere behind you, in that tiny, secret room, the scent of lavender lingers, silent witness to the monks' quiet alchemy of faith, fear, and fragile hope. The stars spin overhead in their slow, ancient waltz as you tread a narrow path winding past the monastery's quiet outer gardens. The lavender fields thin here, blending into patches of wild grasses and stoic yew trees. The night air shifts, carrying something softer, almost mournful, underneath the ever-present scent of lavender. You pause as you spot another gathering, a different kind of ceremony this time. A small procession of monks moves slowly across the lawn, candles cupped in their hands, their robes ghosting over the grass. They are singing, not the brisk, formulaic chants of daily prayers but something slower, more solemn. You follow a respectful distance, the soft thud of their sandaled feet the only percussion. The lavender thins further, giving way to simple wildflowers and short, scrubby grass. Ahead, a small graveyard comes into view, marked by rows of humble stone crosses, tilting and worn by centuries of rain and wind. But it's not the stones that catch your attention. It's the lavender. Fresh bundles, laid with care at the base of each cross, their purple blooms a soft contrast against the pale, rough stone. You watch as each monk steps forward in turn, kneels, places a sprig or a whole bundle, and murmurs a prayer. Lavender not for pest control, not for library preservation, but for farewell. Lavender has long been associated with death and remembrance. In medieval times, it was often woven into funeral wreaths or scattered along the path of a funeral procession. It wasn't just for the living to remember, it was for the dead to be escorted into the next world wrapped in fragrance, in purity, in grace. A quirky tradition even suggests that lavender kept evil spirits at bay, ensuring a smoother passage to the afterlife. The idea being that as lavender soothed the living, so too could it soothe the soul torn from its earthly vessel, guarding it during its most vulnerable journey. Historians still argue whether this use of lavender was purely symbolic or if it had roots in older, pre-Christian rituals that monks quietly repurposed. Either way, the practice persisted, enduring quietly in the folds of Christian ritual like a half-forgotten lullaby. You step closer, drawn to the way the lavender wreaths curl gently in the moonlight. There's something achingly beautiful in it, the simplicity, the reverence, the understanding that even in death, something gentle and fragrant should remain. And it was practical, too. Let's not forget that medieval burial practices weren't the most, hygienic. Lavender helped mask the less poetic realities of death, its sharp, clean scent offering a balm for grieving nostrils as much as grieving hearts. You notice how each sprig has been carefully chosen, the blooms full and unblemished, the leaves fresh. Monks didn't toss whatever was handy onto these graves. They prepared these offerings with the same meticulous care they gave their manuscripts and their gardens. Lavender wasn't just part of their daily labor, it was part of their final goodbyes. There's a fringe belief, one historians love to debate, that monks sometimes embroidered small lavender sachets into their burial shrouds, hidden against the body to protect the soul on its voyage beyond this world. Whether spiritual safeguard or simply a token of peace, the gesture speaks volumes about how deeply lavender was woven into the fabric of their lives and deaths. You stand still, the silence stretching, thick and gentle. The monks finish their ritual, bowing their heads one last time before slowly dispersing back toward the monastery, their candles flickering out one by one like stars slipping behind clouds. You wait until the graveyard is empty before stepping closer to one of the stones. You kneel carefully, mindful not to disturb the bundle of lavender resting there. You brush your fingers lightly over the blooms. Even here, even now, the scent is sharp and sweet, stubbornly alive. It's easy to think of death as the end, especially in a time when life was brutal and short. But here, among the stones and the lavender, it feels less like an ending and more like a continuation. The monks understood that life and death weren't separate chapters, they were one long, intertwined story, with lavender tracing a fragrant line through both. You stand slowly, letting the quiet settle around you one last time, and then turn back toward the monastery. The lavender fields whisper in the breeze as you pass, 1,000 tiny hands waving you on your way, reminding you that even in the darkest moments, there is something that endures. You walk slowly back toward the monastery, the graveyard's memory lingering behind you like a final, whispered hymn. The lavender fields ripple in the breeze, and somewhere in the darkness, an owl calls out, its voice a hollow echo against the ancient stones. As you approach another low building tucked against the monastery's inner wall, the scent of lavender shifts again, sharper this time, mingled with something medicinal, something pungent. The door is ajar, and you step inside, greeted by the familiar clutter of a medieval infirmary. The room is simple, practical, rows of narrow cots with rough linen sheets, tables strewn with jars, bowls, and bandages. Bundles of dried lavender hang from the rafters, their dusky heads nodding gently in the still air. You move through the room, noting the little touches, sprigs of lavender tucked into pillows, bowls of lavender-infused vinegar resting beside the beds, cloth sachets hidden beneath the folded blankets. Lavender was a cornerstone of medieval medicine, a quiet workhorse in the monk's arsenal against a cruel, unrelenting world. It wasn't a cure-all, but it was a comfort, and sometimes, that was enough. Monks weren't just copyists and gardeners, they were healers, often the only source of medical care for miles around. Their knowledge of herbs was hard-won, passed down through generations and painstakingly expanded through careful observation and no small amount of trial and error. Lavender found its way into nearly every remedy. As a poultice for wounds, its oil is believed to prevent infection. As a tea for fevers, calming the body and soothing the spirit. As a fumigant, burned to cleanse sick rooms of miasmas, the bad air they believed carried disease. Historians still argue whether these practices had measurable success or simply offered placebo comfort, but it's hard to deny the care behind them. You kneel beside a low table where a few yellowed scrolls are spread open, their ink faded but still legible. Lists of remedies, some practical, some hopeful to the point of desperation. For fevers of the blood, boil lavender in white wine and cool with snow, apply to the temples with linen cloth. For bites of venomous creatures, crush lavender and rue, mix with honey, apply to wound. For melancholia and black humors, distill lavender in vinegar and inhale the steam at dawn. A fringe theory even suggests that some monks carried small vials of lavender oil as a kind of all-purpose remedy, dabbing it onto their skin or inhaling it during outbreaks of plague or other deadly afflictions. Not that it would have saved them from something like the Black Death, but when hope is thin, even a sliver of protection feels precious. You lift one of the vials from the table, its glass thick and cloudy with age. The oil inside has thickened but still shimmers faintly when you tilt it. You unstopper it and catch a whisper of lavender, sharp and clean even after all this time. It's easy to forget, standing here in this quiet, orderly room, that medieval medicine was often a desperate, messy affair. Bloodletting, leeches, purges, harsh treatments that sometimes did more harm than good. In that context, lavender must have seemed almost miraculous, a treatment that calmed instead of punished, that soothed instead of scorched. There's a strange comfort in knowing that, centuries later, lavender still holds a place in modern medicine. Its essential oils are praised for their antiseptic and anti-inflammatory properties. Its scent is used in aromatherapy to reduce anxiety, promote sleep, ease pain. The monks might not have known the science, but they knew the result. You stand, letting the lavender-laced air settle around you. In this room, lavender wasn't just a flower, it was a balm, a prayer, a fragile line of defense against a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. A quirky aside, some old monastic infirmary manuals recommended planting lavender near sick rooms, believing that the plant's living fragrance could repel not just insects and bad air, but bad spirits. Whether you call it superstition or primitive infection control, it speaks to the monk's relentless ingenuity. You move toward the door, glancing back one last time at the cots, the herbs, the lingering scent of lavender woven into every corner of the room. For the monks, lavender wasn't just a treatment. It was a gesture of care, of hope, of stubborn defiance against illness and despair. A small, fragrant testament that even in the face of suffering, something beautiful could still be offered. As you step back into the night, the infirmary door creaks shut behind you, and the stars above blink and shimmer in the lavender-sweetened dark. The night has deepened into that peculiar hush where even the breeze seems to move more slowly, respectful of the monastery's slumber. You walk along the edge of the cloister, past familiar rows of lavender, their scent softened by the dew settling gently on the leaves. But as you round the northern wing, a change in the air prickles at your skin. You draw closer to a squat, weather-beaten storage building with a heavy wooden door that hangs slightly ajar. The hinges whine as you push it open, stepping into the cool darkness beyond. Immediately, your nose is struck not by lavender, but by something more acrid, something gone wrong. Inside, you find the monastery's bookstore room, or what's left of it. Shelves lean at odd angles, many empty or sagging under the weight of what remains. In the corners, you see manuscripts blackened with mold, their vellum pages curled like autumn leaves. The smell of damp and decay hangs heavy, swallowing up the lavender's usual sweetness. This is what the monks feared most. Despite their careful rituals, bundles of lavender, precise placement of windows, the endless battle against pests and mildew, sometimes the enemy simply won. A closer look reveals that even the lavender here has suffered. The bundles are brittle, gray with age and ineffective against the relentless march of rot. Historians still argue whether there were particularly bad seasons, years of unusual damp, floods, or infestations, when even the monks' best efforts fell short. What is clear is that no matter how many precautions they took, sometimes the decay was inevitable. You crouch beside a crumbling shelf and gingerly pick up a book. The cover flakes away at your touch, revealing pages spotted with black mildew, the words smudged into oblivion. No lavender sachet, no bundle of dried blooms could have saved this. The scent still lingers faintly, a ghost of the monks' defiance, but it's clear they lost this battle. There's a certain heartbreak here. These weren't just books. They were lives, centuries of knowledge captured one careful letter at a time. Treatises on medicine, philosophical debates, the poems and prayers of generations, erased by time and damp. You glance around, trying to imagine the monks' faces when they discovered the damage. The hurried inspections, the frantic airing of pages in weak sunlight, the desperate hope that some could be salvaged. Some manuscripts might have been carried into the main library, placed near the warmth of braziers to dry out, if they weren't too far gone. Others, too decayed to save, were likely burned in quiet ceremonies, the monks mourning the loss of knowledge as one might mourn a brother. A quirky detail from certain records. Monks believed that burning the remains of ruined manuscripts, while painful, was an act of mercy. They thought that the knowledge, once set free by fire, might somehow find its way back to heaven, preserved in spirit if not in ink. Historians still argue whether this was widespread belief or a poetic rationalization for a devastating necessity. You rise slowly, the sadness of the place weighing down your limbs. In a world where so much was uncertain, where war, famine, and plague could strike without warning, the idea of preserving anything for future generations was a radical act of hope. Lavender was a tool in that effort, but it was never a guarantee. The monks knew that. And still, they fought. They sowed their gardens, hung their bundles, brewed their oils, copied their texts. They knew the odds were against them, and they fought anyway. You step outside, the door sighing closed behind you, and take a deep breath. The night air is cool and clean, and the lavender fields whisper around you, patient and enduring. For every lost manuscript, 1,000 more survived. For every failed bundle, countless others did their quiet work, year after year, century after century. The lavender remains, not as a miracle, not as an infallible protector, but as a symbol of persistence. A reminder that even in failure, there is dignity. Even in loss, there is legacy. You run your hand lightly across a flowering stem as you pass, the set blooming in the darkness like a silent prayer. You leave the ruined storeroom behind, the lavender fields beckoning you back toward the heart of the monastery. The sky is deep indigo now, stars scattered carelessly across it, and the moonlight catches on the dewdrops clinging to the lavender leaves, turning the fields into a muted sea of silver and violet. You stroll slowly, breathing in the cool, fragrant air. As you walk, you notice something peculiar, a monk standing alone at the edge of the fields, facing outward toward the hills beyond the monastery walls. His silhouette is still, almost part of the landscape, and at first you wonder if he's deep in prayer. You draw closer, and the breeze carries his voice to you, a low murmur, not prayer, but reading. He holds a small book close, his other hand resting gently on a tall lavender bush. It strikes you how fitting it is, this quiet moment, the fusion of lavender and learning, body and spirit, the living and the recorded word. Lavender has outlasted the monks who first tended these fields, and the words they wrote, the knowledge they'd fought so hard to preserve, has outlasted even the ruin and loss you saw earlier. Today, when you open a medieval manuscript in a museum or library, sometimes you catch it, the faint, lingering scent of the past. Some say it's the vellum, some the ink, but there are whispers among archivists that in a few rare cases, it's the trace of lavender, locked in the pages after centuries of devotion. Historians still argue how much lavender truly contributed to the survival of these priceless works. Was it the flower's properties, or was it simply the monk's stubborn, meticulous care? Did the lavender save the books, or was it a silent partner in a larger dance of diligence and chance? You smile to yourself. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe what matters is that they believed in it enough to plant it, to harvest it, to scatter it across their lives like a blessing. A quirky modern fact, some conservators today still tuck lavender sachets into storage areas, not because they expect miracles, but because it's a nod to history, a gentle homage to those early guardians who fought bookworms and mildew with nothing but knowledge, patience, and purple flowers. You watch the monk close his book and slip it into the folds of his robe. He lingers a moment longer, his hand brushing the lavender as if exchanging a final benediction. Then he turns and walks slowly back toward the cloister, his figure swallowed up by shadow. You stay where you are, inhaling deeply. The lavender fields ripple softly in the breeze, and the stars above gleam with a quiet, enduring light. You can almost hear the voices of the past carried on the wind, the scratch of quills, the rustle of pages, the low murmur of prayer. The monks are gone, but their legacy isn't. It lives in the manuscripts they saved, the gardens they tended, the traditions they wove into the fabric of daily life. It lives in every breath of lavender-scented air that drifts across this ancient ground. The lavender stands guard still, an eternal sentinel over memory, over history, over hope. Its roots deep in the earth, its blooms lifting toward the sky, as if offering up the past to the stars themselves. You stand a while longer, unwilling to disturb the peace, until the night grows thick and heavy and the lavender fields melt into shadow. When you finally turn to go, the scent clings to you, stubborn and sweet. A reminder. A whisper. A promise that even in a world that forgets so quickly, some things endure. The monastery looms ahead, dark and silent now, its windows blank eyes reflecting the faint shimmer of the stars. You step lightly along the familiar path, the lavender fields lining your way like old friends seeing you off after a long visit. The scent is softer now, thinner in the coolness before dawn, but still there, still faithful. As you cross the threshold back into the cloister, the stone underfoot feels almost warm from the memory of centuries of quiet footsteps. The lavender gardens, the scriptorium, the herbarium, all tucked into the stillness like secret compartments of a great, breathing memory. You pause at the arched entrance, turning back for one last look at the fields beyond. The lavender sways gently in the breeze, silvered by the moon, and for a moment, it seems almost to pulse with life, a heartbeat too slow for human eyes. Lavender's story here isn't just about gardens and perfumes. It's about vigilance, protection, a stubborn insistence that knowledge, beauty, and care are worth the battle, no matter how small the weapons. It's easy to overlook such quiet acts in a world that celebrates noise and speed. But here, in these stone walls and furrowed fields, you see the truth the monks understood. It's the quiet things that endure. They wove lavender into their daily lives not out of luxury but necessity. They used it to shield their fragile books, to heal their fragile bodies, to lift their fragile spirits. They trusted it to do the slow, invisible work of preservation, work that didn't yield to immediate results but stretched across generations. Historians still argue about the scope of lavender's influence. Was it truly as central to medieval monastic life as the Romantic vision suggests, or have we projected our modern longing for gentleness and order onto the past? But standing here, breathing the lavender-laced air, the debate feels irrelevant. Facts and feelings weave together, inseparable as threads in a tapestry. There's a modern echo, too, in the way we reach for lavender in soaps and oils and sleep masks, seeking the same calm, the same protection from a world that feels too loud, too fast, too fragile. Without even realizing it, we're following in the monk's footsteps, planting our own fields of lavender against the chaos. You brush your fingers lightly over a cluster of blooms as you pass, the scent rising in a soft exhale. In a world where most monuments to human endeavor crumble, the monk's lavender gardens remain, not as ruins, but as living testaments. Fragrant, stubborn, quietly resilient. You step through the cloister arch and pause for a moment under the vaulting sky. The stars have begun to fade, the first pale wash of dawn brushing the horizon. The lavender fields beyond shimmer in the growing light, endless and enduring. You take a deep breath, filling your lungs with the sharp sweet scent one last time. It clings to your clothes, your hair, the edges of your memory. A parting gift from a world that trusted in quiet strength. As you walk away, the monastery falls behind you, its stones sinking back into shadow. But the lavender walks with you, a silent companion, threading its way into your thoughts, your dreams, your steps. Because some guardians never sleep. And now, as you settle deeper into your bed, your pillow cool against your cheek, imagine those silent lavender fields stretching out under the night sky, endless and still. Imagine the careful hands of monks, long vanished, tending those rows with quiet devotion, the purple blooms trembling gently in the breeze. The lavender's scent, sharp, sweet, steady, lingers even now, a whisper from another world. It reminds you that not all battles are fought with noise and fury. Some are waged in silence, in patience, in the slow tending of fragile things. Some are won not with strength, but with resilience, and a kind of quiet faith that the small, steady acts we choose every day can outlast the chaos around us. So breathe in slowly. Picture those ancient cloisters, the stone warmed by the long-forgotten sun, the air heavy with the scent of crushed lavender. Let the weight of the day slip away, like sand falling through open fingers. Let the soft hum of history cradle you, a lullaby woven from parchment and petals. You're not so far from those monks, really. Like them, you seek a little peace, a little shelter, a little meaning. And like them, you find it in the simplest places, in a breath, in a scent, in the quiet endurance of things that grow. Sleep well, traveler. Let the lavender keep watch a while longer. Sweet dreams.